long as it's not me. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, Arthur, let's start with you. I'm going to have you introduce yourself and talk about how you're involved in the activities that will be going on this weekend and the movement itself.
I'm Arthur Lee. I've been involved in the movement for more than 50 years at this point. I would imagine I've been a victim of the state in institutional terms, and didn't like it then, don't like it now, and I don't think it's a humane way to deal with people with all their flaws, and not so flawed. The state is often just as flawed as the people that they declare to be flawed. So that's my entree, and that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Arthur. Courtney, can you do the same? Introduce yourself in your role as an organizer and also kind of giving us a preview of what's happening this weekend.
Sure, absolutely. So my name's Courtney Morris. I am an organizer with No Justice Under Capitalism, which is a united front voluntary coalition that just came together in April, really to demand mass releases from the state at the dawn of the pandemic, ripping through prisons, jails, and ICE detention centers in California. So we held our first action in May at San Quentin, subsequently in June, which is the first action I joined, and then subsequently joined the coalition, and have hosted numerous protests at San Quentin at former CDC, our Secretary Ralph Diaz's house, and Governor Newsom's. And this Saturday, the 10th, we are hosting a protest beginning at 4:30 at the Larkspur Ferry Terminal. And we'll be walking up at 5 p.m. up Sir Francis Drake to the west gate of San Quentin, where we will be holding a demonstration on the anniversary of the agreement to end hostilities, which was really one of the most modern acts of resistance from behind bars, when people of all different backgrounds united together and agreed to end racial hostilities in order to unify in solidarity against the number one enemy, which is state violence. And really it was an agreement, not just for inside, but also for the outside, and really had an impact on families. So we're going to be recognizing prison resistance over the decades, from George Jackson, the Attica Uprising, the Pelican Bay Hunger Solidarity Strikes, the agreement to end hostilities, and really looking at as well what resistance looks like moving forward, and where we need to look more at resistance, from climate change to advocating for trans incarcerated lives as well. And we'll also be recognizing lives lost in the resistance and in the pandemic.
And before we go further, you said it's the anniversary of the agreement to end hostilities. What year was the agreement, did it come into fruition?
2012.
Okay, so we're looking at the 8-year anniversary.
Correct.
Okay, which one of you two would like to talk a little bit about the significance of George Jackson and the Attica Uprising? Would you like to talk, Arthur, or do you want to keep going, Courtney?
We got to get Thel in the mix there.
I'm sorry, I coughed for a moment. It's been in dust all day.
I'm sorry. I was asking if you'd like to talk about George Jackson and the significance of that, and also anything about the Attica Uprising that you'd like our listeners to be educated about, for those who aren't familiar, and for those who are, things you'd like them to keep in mind.
Well, with George Jackson, I think he became the person who, I guess at that particular period in history behind the walls, who had actually taken a look at society, just outside of himself. I think that was significant. He was in prison for a $70 robbery, and the average length of stay for that particular case was about 3 years. We found that out when they ended indeterminate sentence and averaged what people did for various cases, and with robbery, the type with no violence, just robbing somebody, was 3, 4, or 5 years was the average. Generally, Black people did a whole lot more than the 3, whole lot more than the 5. That's where averages come from. You get the people who do the least time and the most time, and you add them together and divide, and that's where you come up with averages. And so George was real clear that something was rotten in Denmark, and he began to advocate that something was wrong and to get other people to begin to view what was going on. And ultimately, he ended up, at the time of his death at San Quentin, he had been in prison for 12 years on this case that generally 5 years was the top you did. And it was a political consideration at that particular time. Also at that particular time, the way some people were being treated in prison is sort of akin to what you saw with George Floyd, only it wasn't with a knee on the neck. It could be other things. In San Quentin, back at that period, one of the biggest scandals was a fellow named Bennett, who was in a cell in the Justice Center in San Quentin, and guards gassed him until there was no oxygen left in his cell and he asphyxiated. In Soledad, there were people in an exercise yard and an argument rang out, and a guard fired 4 shots, and he hit 3 Black men in the head and killed them. One of the bullets ricocheted off of some concrete and I think hit one of the white prisoners in the leg. After that, there grew a resistance. After those incidences, there grew a resistance amongst Black prisoners that it still reverberates around the whole prison system. Anytime you talk to a guard, or anytime you talk to the powers that be, the first thing they want to tell you about is this history of this really bad man called George Jackson and all the stuff associated with it. So there literally was a rebellion. It's a kind to the rebellion you saw in the streets, with the difference being that the one you saw on the street was multi-ethnic. When people saw really what the police do and what Black people have been saying for years, and they came out with the cell phones, it was like in people's faces, and it was hard to ignore. So Attica itself was an uprising recognizing a manifesto was written here in California for Folsom prisons called a Folsom Manifesto. And it was about basic human rights, being dealt with human, whether you was inside a cage or not, you were still a human being. And there were demands. And those demands, when they got to Attica, Attica made those demands. And when there was not anyone to address those demands or take people serious, there was an uprising at Attica. And during that period of history, there were many uprisings around this country in prisons. Many of them people didn't rise to the level at San Quentin or Attica, but nevertheless, they were. Things that people don't know, that in Alabama, for an example, they had so many older prisoners sitting in hallways in wheelchairs that couldn't even walk, waiting for food. And some media got in and took pictures and stuff, and it went all over the news. And they shut the Alabama prison system down, the state of Alabama. and they freed every one of these old people. Not some of them, every one of them, because people made an outcry that, hey, these people couldn't be dangerous. They can't even walk. Where are they going to roll up on you and commit a crime? So the struggle is against the injustices, I think, that people who have the power to put people in cages exercise. Not so much different than the people who had the power to put those children in cages at the border exercised it because they had that power. And we don't have to accept it, and we're not. And I'm sorry for being long-winded.
No, I appreciate it. And I have more. I want to make you talk more if I've got you for a little longer. So really quick, I think you've talked about a lot of the issues surrounding Attica. For those listeners who might not know anything about it, can you just talk about kind of like the quick version of what is it? What is the specific thing that we refer to as the Attica uprising? When did it occur? What does it look like? How did it get that name? Just kind of a quick review for those who might not have those logistical details.
Attica is a prison in upstate New York. When George Jackson was killed at San Quentin in August 21st, 1971, in September, the prisoners in Attica essentially shut down, went on strike, didn't cooperate, and made some demands about being treated humanely, and that the consideration for what they were in prison for would be addressed not as vengeance, but as something to move beyond. And that's not what was going on. It was just flat out vengeance. And finally, they were not being heard, and they started with a work stoppage, and people with the guns just ignored them. So they took the prison. They got the people in people on the yard, because back in those days, guards walked around with prisoners. And they took them all and set them down in the middle of the yard and told the warden, can you hear us now? And let's talk about these conditions now. Well, they decided that they would talk long enough until they got all their marksmen and all those people in place, and they would take back the yard forcibly. And so they did. They started shooting, and they shot up a whole bunch of people. And they first lied and said that the prisoners had stabbed these guards and killed all these guards on the yard. And to how history works out and what happens when people die, you have to determine how they died before you can take anybody to trial on what you charge them with. And lo and behold, every guard that died had a bullet in them. And it was kind of hard to reconcile the notion that prisoners was shooting the guards on the yard when the bullets they were hit was with the weapons that they had on the guard towers. So they just indiscriminately started shooting people. And unfortunately, it made Attica a household name and a household event. And it can't come in right after George Jackson, which really, as a human being, galvanized the notion that prisoners were people. And if you want to know more about it, he wrote a couple of books. One of them was his letters to people, which dealt with his observations of what was going on at the time. And the other one, called Blood in My Eye, was, I think, a lot of the pain of his brother's death. And an educational tool to people understand that they were people, and the educational level that went into prison. The prison had a school system that nobody went to. And when people like George Jackson started school on the yards, education classes, there were 4 And the guards got really nervous about that and decided to exercise their power. And it ultimately backfired on everybody.
And did you say George Jackson was initially charged for a robbery of $70?
Yeah, that's why he was in prison.
And he
$70
served
robbery.
how many years?
12.
So this if we want to connect this kind of historical case to the current day events, I think we're seeing some really interesting things. Like maybe some things have changed, and we're also seeing like a lot of things haven't really changed all that much. So, you know, you talked about George Floyd's case, there's Breonna Taylor, there's so many cases that keep on happening by the minutes, and then people are outraged. And it's very interesting. You know, in the case of George Floyd, I was talking about this with a group of college students yesterday. There's somebody somewhere had a perception that he might have had a $20 bill that was counterfeit. And even if that were to have been true, it's never justifiable. Like what happened is in no way justified. But what's striking about this and about the $70 robbery that you're talking about, or when people, like when property might get damaged during protests, and we're hearing a lot of people talking about the damage of someone's livelihood. And in the meantime, lives are being lost. And I've been trying to, there's not really a way to reconcile this, but I'm wondering what is your take on it when people are serving more than a decade in prison for potentially stealing $70, or in some cases, like losing their life over a little bit of money. What do we take from this moment? And maybe you both want to weigh in, and how do we help people? I don't know. I mean, I guess it comes back to the capitalist system. So I'd love your take on this as well, Courtney. But what does that mean when we place a higher value on a little bit of money than on life? And how can we move beyond this as a people?
Yeah, great question. And huge problem. I think what you said is correct, that capitalism is at the heart, or rather the heartless center of all of this. And I think that, you know, the overarching theme of George Jackson and the Attica uprising really laid the foundation for the human rights struggle in the prison system, and demanding that human rights be recognized, demanding dignity. And it's the same thing that we're arguing for today through all of these struggles. And so I think that a lot of people want change in this country. It's hard when we've so obviously been rooted in capitalism as the foundation of our country that is absolutely rooted in systemic racism. And I think there are a lot of people that are starting to, there are a lot of people like who have been fighting against this system all his life. And I think there are a lot of youngsters out there now as well that we're seeing in the streets that want something different. We're seeing more progressive legislators, and we're seeing a lot of people really trying to hold on to this really old system that's really not working out. So I appreciate the argument of defunding the police and people starting to look, hey, you know, Oakland PD takes up 44% of the city budget. Hang on, those are our tax dollars. And we're looking really critically at you know, their unregulated hours and these bloated budgets and the militarization of the police. And if we can start to really continue to critically analyze that, and also look at the prison system with the same critical analysis. I think CDC's budget's like $13 billion a year. So when you know, at a time when people are really critically analyzing where our tax dollars are going to, and that they're not going to us, they're not going into eradicating crime, because our homicide rates aren't going down as a country. So clearly mass incarceration is not solving criminality. It's not solving homicide, because it's not for the people. And so, you know, I think this really, to kind of cross market these movements that are going on, if we can look at mass incarceration in the US for what it is, which is just a financial scheme, that we can start to really break it apart. And especially, analyzing obviously the disproportionate rates that Black and brown bodies are, we're choosing to fill our prisons with because we're passing the policies that create that. And if we can start to analyze CCPOA, the Prison Union of California, with the same scrutiny that we are the police budgets, I think we'll find that we have a lot of money to divert to housing, healthcare, and education, which statistically prevents crime from happening because you're ending cycles, right? So I think the more that we invest in these movements, we invest in our own education, that will invest less in prioritizing the capitalistic system.
And Arthur, thank you, Courtney. And Arthur, did you want to add on to that at all?
Yeah, listen, it has not gotten better. It has gotten worse. And I mean, not only in human terms, but statistically worse. So they went from the indeterminate sentence, where virtually anything you did in California was some number as low as 6 months to life. That was the sentence range. You're gonna be locked up 6 months to life. They, because of the fight inside, they did away with this. So the people would know when they were going home, and the reason that people wouldn't fight them then, because they would have something to look forward to. There was a mass release from California prisons in 1975 to 1977. It's public record, you can go look at it. It was just massively released. So the people that I came to prison with in terms of activities, we were members of a little known organization called the Black Panther Party. And we all virtually got out. I mean, it was one member still there who did not get out, and he's 71 years old now, and the figure of punishment, I guess, for all of us.
Arthur, go ahead and lift him up. Tell our listeners a little bit about him, his name, his
name is Romaine Fitzgerald. We call him Chip, and he's been locked up since October 9th, 1969. And I know it because it's the day my son was born. So he's been locked up all this time. Now, he's by no means the only person. So they kept some people that they were able to hold on to while they changed the various laws. And so these indeterminate sentences became determinate sentences. And what they did with that was, determinate sentence might be 7 years for a robbery. And I don't know what the actual new sentence structure is, but you can be charged with 7 years for a robbery. For armed robbery, 7 years in prison, buddy. And then they add something they call enhancements. And so they could give you 40 years for enhancements. So now your sentence is 47 years. There's one case of a woman whose significant other who's locked up, and she does some work with No Justice Under Capitalism, whose husband was given 25 years to life for driving under the influence of alcohol. Now, I didn't say he had an accident, because he didn't. That was, it was not as a result of a car crash and somebody getting hurt and vengeance in that way. But they locked him up, and he's there right now. I mean, this is not a past tense. He's locked up right now, 25 years to life for being under the influence of alcohol. And if history serves me well, and I'm getting old, I don't remember it as well as I would like, but I remember a name called Betty Ford. I think that was her. She had some relationship with the president. I think she was a president's significant other. And she was hailed as a conquering hero in America because she had a substance abuse problem and did something about it and became the poster person for doing something about public abuse, and that it made people understand that substance abuse was an illness. It was a disease. Yet, she didn't go to prison for substance abuse. I would imagine she was probably under the influence a few times if you're using substances. And in general, there are many people that are serving these sentences. And I liken it to medieval times when they sent you to the dungeon. You know, you was never sentenced to 5 years in the dungeon. You were simply sentenced to the dungeon. And if you got out of the dungeon, you was quite fortunate. Most people died in dungeons. And California, particularly, has that mentality, this liberal state that they talk about. This governor, Newsom, people are just giving him all kind of kudos for signing the bill just recently. And that bill was to diversify corporations. So you had to have ethnic diversity, sexual diversity. You got to have these corporations, just can't be these regular old same people. And people are just, I mean, it was a great thing that he did on paper, but he's got his own board. It's called a parole board. Over 90% of them are law enforcement. Nobody representing the community talking about what have people done since they've been inside, and in fact, what have inside offered for people to do to become different people, to work through this process, as if rehabilitation is something that either comes from the clouds or one human being can stuff inside of another human being. Don't work like that. People who rehabilitate based on their commitment to being different people. And it's one of the things that George talked about with people who came to prison and who thought it was real cool that they was out there in the community doing activities that were not cool. And he talked about it in these terms. He talked about, we have to transform ourselves into new people. We cannot be these people who came into this situation because it's not healthy for our communities. And he asked everybody who was able to get out, because he never even saw himself getting out. He asked for one commitment. And that one commitment that he asked for was simply that go back and be an asset to your community and not a liability. You've already taken that road. He asked people to do that for him because George, I don't know if he was psychic, but I don't think he ever thought he would get out. So.
Thank you, Arthur. I know that Courtney had to leave, but do I have you for a couple more minutes?
Where did Courtney go?
She had to go to a 6 o'clock meeting, she said. But
yeah, I'm supposed to be at that meeting too. But okay.
I won't keep you for too much longer, I promise.
Right.
I mean, I do feel obligated because you mentioned somebody who was pulled over for driving under the influence. I feel obligated to kind of show, show the inconsistency with that. My children and I were hit head on last year by a drunk driver, a white woman, last summer, and my daughter's yelling in the background. And she pleaded no contest. She gets the equivalent of 5 days, but she'll get to do community service and I think maybe 9 months of treatment. So there really is vast difference in the treatment that people are getting, and that's a tough case.
Well, you know, one of the things that I guess I've learned over the years is to be the struggle for consistency. So I don't know this woman, and so I would never equate two things. But what I do know is what I've seen and what I've experienced in terms of watching people come in for similar cases and leaving at vastly different times of having been locked up. I know racism is alive and well, and I don't look down my nose at racist people. I'm on my guard all the time, but I don't look down my nose because I understand that if you've been taught to be racist all your life, you're gonna be racist. And it's like rehabilitation. If at that point that you struggle to become that new person, that person that America pretends that exists, when you become that person, that's when your personal struggle changes or transforms. But in general, in society in general, it's going to take a lot of education, and it's not going to be just people who are the victims of racism who are going to have to engage in that education. And I'm hopeful that change can occur. I'm not giddy in hope about that, but I try to be as objective as I can be, knowing that all people are subjective. But
because what's the alternative, right? Even if change is going to be slow, we don't want to sit around and.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's why I struggle. And I know that my time on the planet is, it's statistically winding down. And I mean, I accept that because people come into being and they go out of being. And that's a part of what life is. Without the other side of life would actually have no meaning. So I live it while I can, and understanding that I want to leave something better, or at least challenge the things that are not so good while I'm here. And hopefully my kids and their kids, and someday in the future, all people will be able to enjoy a society that is populated by new people.
I love it. Before you go, though, because you have your own powerful story as a person who has, as your connection, because of your connection with Black Panthers, you're a member. Last time I asked you if you were a member, and you said, no, I'm always a member. I'm still alive, so therefore. So you have that historical context as a part of the struggle, and then you have your own experience with having been incarcerated. And I wondered if you wanted to maybe just share a little bit of your narrative about what it is that led you to be incarcerated and what has kept you in this lifelong fight to bring about awareness and justice in the aftermath of that.
I'm not very much for storytelling. I'm one story, like once upon a time and happily ever after, all that stuff in the middle is muddled. But here's how I understand that process, is that becoming involved in what's loosely called a struggle, a reflection of being involved in life. So I grew up in the South. I have drank out of water fountains with signs that had colored only. I've been in places where you had to go into the back door if you were able to go in at all. And struggled from a very young age and walked up down the street and protested against that kind of stuff. Ultimately, I got older and I decided that nobody would ever hit me again while I waited for their humanity to catch up with their actions so that they would understand that hitting people is not a very humane thing to do. So I decided that I would not tolerate that. I was a member of the Black Panther Party. I am a member of the Black Panther Party because people are still locked up. People that I was on the street with and fought with in 1969. The Chip, Romaine Fitzgerald. I'm on his defense committee to this day. I can't in good conscience say I'm an ex anything, because as long as the people that stood up and took those chances with us, how do we sit down? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not wired like that. I guess maybe it's a good way to say it. So I'm just doing what I think is socially responsible. And I don't think it's nothing special about me having been in the Black Panther Party. I have no Panther fantasies. I mean, fixations and none of that stuff.
How many years did you serve? How many years were you incarcerated?
I was in prison for 7 years.
And yours was also kind of a minor case that you had to do 7 years for. Was that?
No, mine was a major case.
Yours was a major.
Very major case.
Okay.
Yeah, mine was a most unusually major case, but I was not convicted of what they tried to convict me of, and like I said, they shooed us out of prison, and I was one of the people that got shooed.
Do you feel like sharing about what the sentence was that led to the 7 years?
Well, my sentence was 5 years to life.
Okay, and it was for?
It was for second-degree murder.
Okay, and for Chip's case, in Chip, I feel like you told me he had been eligible for parole a few times and it never happened for some reason. Is that the case?
I got out of prison in 1976. That was the first year he was eligible for parole. So he's been eligible since. He was 49 years in prison. He went to the parole board and he had a cell phone, which was what you call a violation or a breaking of the rules. It wasn't a violent.
Gotten from a guard. Because
well, I don't know. I had never seen him arrive in the store or heard of one being in any of these places or any of the other ones. So if they're coming in and the prisoners are inside and the cell phones are outside, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that staff is bringing them in. Now, I can't say it's guards. So they might have a cook or something. I mean, I don't know. Or some educator. All the guards could be like all the guards that are killing people out on the street. And the rest of them are good people until they kill somebody, then they get to be in the ranks of the bad people. I don't know, so I'm not going to lay anything at anybody's feet. I say this, that the cell phone is not something that's violent. And for them to say that he had to do an extra 5 years for that cell phone, while they are in fact bringing them in, is so fundamentally sick in a human fashion. And that's why I say it's worse. It hasn't gotten better with time. It has gotten worse with time. And they keep talking about rehabilitation, CDCR, rehabilitation. No, retribution is what it is. And And the reason they can't rehabilitate anybody is that they think it's an export. It's something you export into people. You work with people when you want people to change. That when we wanted people to fight the state and the system, we worked with them. We worked on the yard. We had classes for people who could not read or write. The first class was reading and writing, and people was assigned to them every day that they did class right on the yard with learning how to read and write and to think about things, not what to think about things, but how do you have an analysis of things where you get it off of you and look at it for what it is as opposed to what you want it to be. So that level of rehabilitation has led to, as I see, I look at people like Dorsey Nunn at All of Us and None. I met him in prison when he couldn't read. Today, he's the executive director of a public interest law firm without a law degree, probably the only one in the United States of America. The CDC didn't do anything for him. If they did, he wouldn't be out protesting them all the time. So.
Right. I mean, and then the rehabilitation or the literacy skills and all these things can be transmitted or shared, or people can participate. And then there's a whole nother system when you get out of prison and you have the asterisk beside your name that says convicted felon, right? And that creates a whole nother set of obstacles.
Right. No, it's all.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. It's all a bad setup.
So I know you have to go, but I think you have so much wisdom and life experience. So before you do go, I just want to ask, so as somebody who grew up experiencing deep levels of racism, and we're seeing that, maybe it takes a different form or a different appearance over the years, but it's still very much alive and well, unfortunately. And then somebody who got involved in the struggle as a Black Panther, had a conviction, served 7 years, are continuing to do advocacy work for CHIP and other people who are still incarcerated. I guess, what is the most important lesson that you've learned from this very intense life journey and dedication toward this struggle? And what do you want people to take away from this moment?
So, from a personal perspective, from what I think that has helped me move what I hope is forward, is the realization that change does not occur in a timeline that people apply to the situation. Just because you were there and you were part of what's going on, don't mean that you get a right to see the outcome. That the notion that your participation fundamentally affects the outcome is a level of arrogance that I've learned to get away from, and to understand that I may not be here to see anything. The fundamental change that this society, I certainly hope, will undergo and move forward with. And it's not important. What's important is that you do what you can do while you're here, and trust the process, because just because we move on, we go out of being, the legacy of our having been in being doesn't just go off like turning off a light to what exists. The light is turned off in terms of our participation, but while the light is on, get busy, do what you can. If you can do more, do more. if you can't do more, do something. And try to get people to understand that being an asset to the communities that we live in is so much more important than many of the things that we will ever do, because people listen to your sounds that come out your face, but they really watch the behavior that you exhibit in life. And line those sounds up with what you do. Trust the process, appreciate humans, and understand that they have the capacity to do a whole lot more than we do. And ride the wave, try to ride it into a good place.
Thank you. And finally for today, you have so much wisdom and life experience. I could talk with you for 2 hours, but I won't make you do that. I wondered if you wanted to highlight anything about why participating tomorrow is especially important for you and what you hope people can take away from either being there or thinking about this time.
Well, I guess for me, it's a joy to see younger people recognizing that there's been some history and to want to be a part of acknowledging that history, and that they're taking this up. So I'm in a spot where I can kind of relax a minute and appreciate the struggle that's beginning as people are taking up to stuff, where it's going to go. A lot of people get tired of struggling and they go and get a really good job. Hey, did my part, but appreciate you. But just seeing other people who don't have this experience having their own experience today, because whatever happened to us in our time and our experience, it's happened, and I don't subscribe to that notion that we gotta heal, and we gotta things we so damaged. I don't think so. I think we just got some experiences and we learned to appreciate the fact that we lived through some stuff and nobody can tell us lies about how things really are. We'll be all right as long as we don't allow ourselves to be in that place where, oh, look what they did to me. Gosh, when I look and see what they did to some people, God, Rochelle McGee, 57 this year. Well, coming on 57 years. I mean, you talking about 7 years? No, 57 years. And others. So I'm appreciating the young people, and it's joyful to see people struggling to understand and put in perspective what's going on. So hey, I'm giddy.
What year were you born, by the way?
1949.
Okay, I really appreciate you talking not only about this weekend's events, but also about your journey. It's always a joy to speak with you. Is it okay with you if I share our full interview in addition to taking part of this for the radio story?
Oh, I don't. Yeah, as long as people leave me alone, and I want to.
You don't want me to give that? You don't want me? I don't even have your contact information. So
No. What I'm saying is just. Yeah. Just do whatever what happens and helps your radio program and your career, because I appreciate the fact that you have taken the time and taken your own talents and what you do to shine a light on some of the darkness, because we need light.
Yeah,
And
no,
I
I
appreciate
appreciate
that.
you being willing to share. And really, that's the way that I think that we can break through people's kind of misconceptions is by sharing stories like yours and experiences like yours. And so I appreciate that. And I will get you on the radio tomorrow afternoon, and I'm sure I'll be talking with you and Courtney again about a future event.
Okay.
All right, take good care. Thank you for sticking with me, even though you have another meeting.
Yeah. Okay. So
Happy Friday.
say hello to you young people. I know they wanted to get in on this too.
I know. Take good care.
All right. You too.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.